I have a fellow YouTuber here with me today to go over some of the biggest conservative news stories, including some of the crazy that's happening at the Democrat National Convention in Chicago. To help me go through all that, I have Lauren Chen with me. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
All right. So I wanted to jump in on this idea with you. I went back and I rewatched the entire 35-minute Barack Obama speech at the DNC. I saw a lot of people in my YouTube comments saying, I tried to watch, I had to leave, I only lasted 5 minutes. I was able to stay on the bowl for 35 minutes and watch the whole thing. And honestly, I forgot how gifted of a speaker he is. I noticed he would eloquently explain something moderate Democrats believe in or hope for, and then he would say, that's what Kamala and Tim believe in. Then he would give another milquetoast policy the middle would rally behind, and he would say, that's what Kamala and Tim believe in. How come it took Barack Obama to tell us what Kamala Harris believes in, what she's going to focus on? And do you think that she is just going to be Barack Obama's next puppet in the White House?
Well, that's what's been so interesting to me watching this entire campaign unfold. It seems like the best campaigners the Democrats actually have to offer aren't their actual candidates. Not only do we see Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, like you mentioned, kind of doing a lot of the heavy lifting for Kamala, articulating her policies, why exactly she's a good pick, doing a better job than she does herself, I might add. But even before that, we saw Gavin Newsom when Biden was still the candidate doing very similar things. He's the one who's going on national TV trying to make the case for a Biden presidency. It's like, well, if the actual candidate can't articulate these points themselves, why are they your candidate in the first place? And like you, I was also reminded of how gifted a speaker Obama really is. But it was interesting seeing him really put forward a more moderate and centrist platform for the party. When we look at actually Kamala's record, she, I think, was the most liberal senator that there has been. Same thing with Waltz. He's been especially very leftist when it comes to things like abortion or even things like vaccine or COVID regulations and mandates. So it's really interesting. It's almost like I feel like they're being very two-faced with the voters at the moment. And I hope that there are people who see through that despite all of the polishing that Barack Obama is currently doing.
Yeah, I do think that there is a lot of two-face going on with Kamala. She can't seem to articulate what she believes in. We're being gaslit, right? Like tonight, she'll be giving this speech, right? Where her focus or her campaign is going to be a new path forward. Well, you've been in the White House for 1,300 days. Like, what are you doing? And I predicted this on my own channel to my audience. I said, you watch. She's going to distance herself from Biden. I almost said, Biden. From Biden. She's also going to distance herself from the most progressive wing of her own party so that she looks like a moderate centrist. But then on day one, she will come back in as an ultra liberal, super progressive Democrat leader. And I think Obama is in on this. I think Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, Nancy Pelosi, they're all in on this. In order to win, we have to have the moderates. And so they're placating them. They're saying nice things. They're whispering into their ear. But I just don't believe it, just like you.
No, I think you're right to be cynical. And that's the thing. We had Kamala's little teaser opening speech in which she talked about the things that unite us together. You know, we're all Americans. If you actually look at what few policy ideas she's floated out there, they are nothing short of far left. I mean, the insane capital gains tax, the hike on corporate tax rates. America already has one of the highest in the world, by the way. We also look at things like, of course, that the far leftists like to float out to voters, which is student debt forgiveness, healthcare gimmies. One of at least the other speakers at the DNC, maybe not Kamala herself, even said that a Kamala presidency would ensure that abortion becomes the law of the land. These are not really moderate ideas. And people often like to say that Trump, he's the radical candidate. If you look at actually what he's saying, especially this time around in his campaign, he's talking about the merits of legal immigration, how abortion needs to be a states' rights issue. It's up to, every person to decide for themselves. These were actually talking points of the Democratic Party just maybe 10 years ago. So the idea that Kamala is a return to normalcy in the center while Trump is this crazy ideologue, it's just not actually reflected in the policies that they are pushing forward. I was hoping that Trump would be a little bit more right wing this time around. It doesn't look like that's what's going to be happening, though. But no, I think that if your party needs to rely on essentially deceiving voters, lying to them about your actual intentions, actual policies are, then I frankly just don't think you deserve to be in office.
Yeah. Speaking of abortions, I do want to talk about that. There's a lot of energy at the DNC. I've been watching it. I've been seeing the clips online from dozens of vasectomies done on young men that don't have families yet, to close to 30 abortions performed on campus at a mobile abortion clinic. Like they kicked off the event by having babies killed. To me, this seems like a bloodthirsty cult, right? Like if you walked into the woods and they're like, okay, listen, before we start the speeches, 25 women have to sacrifice their babies and men have to sacrifice their testicles to appease the gods. I don't know. It's really weird. There's so much hype around this. And yet, just out this morning, Nielsen's ratings show that the DNC received 22% less viewership than in 2016 when Hillary Clinton ran. Do you see this as evidence that maybe less of the country is interested in Kamala Harris? Or do you think they just don't give a crap? They've already decided they're going to vote for her. Why such a large drop in viewership?
Well, I mean, first off, regarding the whole abortion mobile, it is very grim. It's very macabre. And I don't know if you're familiar with Carl Benjamin, but he's a commentator from the UK. And he mentioned that, Europe, basically every country has some form of abortion. There are exceptions, of course. But even then, the abortions restrictions that European countries have in America, they would be considered far right. We're talking about like 12 weeks, 16 weeks, that type of thing. Restrictions that the pro-abortion lobby nowadays would just consider unthinkable, because it needs to be, right up until the moment of birth, maybe even a little bit after that women are allowed to terminate a pregnancy. But Carl Benjamin mentioned that even in these European countries where abortion is essentially settled, you're allowed to have it within reason. This is still not something that they would do, proudly flaunt an abortion mobile. And it's funny, a lot of Democrats take issue with the idea that they are actively pro-abortion. But when I look at these type of campaign strategy, I just don't know any other way to describe it. Not only did we have the abortions and vasectomies going on, but there are also different organizations passing around condoms and different types of birth control at the DNC. And I just look at this and it's like, really, is this what you want your party to represent? It seems very, very odd. I don't see these issues as just things that responsible, well-adjusted adults are too concerned with. But regarding your point about viewership, it's really hard to accurately get a grasp on what the overall attitude is toward Kamala. I think a lot of people are very disillusioned with the polling out there, and with good reason. A lot of people are also very cynical about media reports about Kamala's popularity, or maybe J.D. Vance's lack of popularity. It's very hard to know what the actual feelings on the ground are. In some ways, I think we might actually have to wait until Election Day, if not several weeks after, to know how people really feel about Kamala. But I think overall enthusiasm is just not what they they're trying to portray it as. I think it's safe to say that Kamala probably a more exciting candidate for a lot of Democrats than Biden, but that still doesn't mean that they're going to be able to recapture the energy of Hillary Clinton, who was the first major female presidential candidate that had a good chance of winning, or even Barack Obama, the first. Like there was actual historical precedence for people being excited, to vote for candidates like that. But if we look at Kamala, she's not really the first anything meaningful. She doesn't have a huge track record to back up any excitement, and they're trying a lot of social media gimmicks with the whole brat thing. I'm too old to even understand what that's all about, but I don't see the same type of enthusiasm that we even had, for Clinton, never mind Obama. And I think that's what you see reflected in the DNC viewership.
Yeah. Let me float an idea to you. Want to get your thoughts on it. So Hillary Clinton was one of the first speakers. And I literally saw articles that say that she was shocked that she wasn't booed, right? Like she doesn't even have a place in her own party, but they cheered. They were excited that she was excited about a potential first female president. During the speech, Donald Trump came up, and the crowd started chanting, "Lock him up, lock him up, lock him up," right? And this happened with Republicans when Trump was going up against Hillary, right? The big difference is Trump decided privately to not have the DOJ pursue Hillary Clinton because it would be bad for the country. Democrats don't think that way. They want this man jailed for 700 years. My thinking is, you have Judge Juan Merchan of New York, you have the elites of the Democrat Party. They just got confirmation from their voter base that they want to see Donald Trump locked up. Do you think that this may persuade the elites and Judge Juan Merchan on September 18th to go ahead and jail Donald Trump? Because it would rally the base and bring in a lot of energy. I don't know. It's just a thought that I've been having.
To be honest with you, I'm having a hard time believing that they're not already trying to throw out absolutely all the stops that they possibly can in order to make sure that Trump doesn't even have the opportunity to become president, or maybe even be on the ballot come November. I think, after we already saw that in 2020, we had that now infamous Time Magazine article about what steps were taken behind the scenes to fortify the 2020 election and ensure that another Donald Trump presidency would never happen again. I think the elites, like you mentioned, they are already fully ideologically committed as much as they possibly could be to ensuring that Donald Trump never sets foot again in the Oval Office. I really, I'm trying to think of something else that might energize them or galvanize them even more, but I think they've already reached the full level of commitment. So I'm not very optimistic of what the judge in September might actually say in regard to President Trump. But honestly, I think, and I hate to say this, but I think the country is so polarized at this point that, a conviction sentencing Trump to something insane that will inspire the people who hate him. And it will also simultaneously galvanize his own supporters to fight back against the system. So I just, when it comes to Donald Trump specifically, I think we're in one of those situations where Republicans will love anything that comes Trump's way and Democrats will hate it. And I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to cover that. Michelle Obama was one of the keynote speakers. She's the most popular woman in the Democrat Party. Like, there's Hillary Clinton and then there's Michelle Obama. Like, she just far exceeds, right? And she mentioned in her speech that her parents taught her a lot, but they were suspicious of people who took too much. Now, of course, she meant people that have money. The Obamas, however, have a net worth of $70 million. They own 4 luxury properties, fully staffed, private chefs, house cleaners, all of that. Michelle Obama is paid $750,000 for each 1 hour speech that she gives. How have the Obamas not taken too much? And why do people think that the Obamas are like them when, in fact, the Obamas are at the top of the upper elites within the Democrat Party?
Now, of all the speeches I have to say that we've seen so far at the DNC, Michelle Obama's honestly frustrated me the most. Essentially, her entire speech was just grievance peddling, complaining about, inequality, racism, sexism. Meanwhile, I'm sorry, but you are Michelle Obama, right? You're in an extremely wealthy family with wealth and privileges that most people could never even dream of, regardless of whether they're white, black, Asian, you name it. And what especially triggered me, if I can use that term, was when at one point she said that, referring to black people, they will never have the affirmative action of generational wealth. Well, I don't know if your audience is familiar with this, but according to Forbes, Sasha Obama, her daughter, is estimated to have a net worth of around $10 million in her early 20s due to her parents' wealth. So essentially, it was just bringing Michelle Obama out on stage to bring up all of the grievances that Democrats usually like to stoke between the races, between the classes. And I hope people are able to see through the hypocrisy of that coming from her, especially. I mean, did she write this speech in her Martha's Vineyard sprawling estate, like you said, with all these private chefs? And, I don't begrudge anyone's wealth or success, but when you are simultaneously using your platform of wealth and success to, stoke resentment amongst Americans for those who are of different race than themselves, or different income background, I really, really take issue with that. And frankly, they did a similar thing with Oprah Winfrey's speech. Again, like Michelle Obama, Oprah Winfrey, these are the worst possible people you could trot out to talk about things like wealth inequality, sexism, and racism. But it's almost like they're completely tone deaf, the people who are writing these speeches and choosing these speakers, because there are a lot of working class people, including white people, who are really hurting right now. They don't need to be lectured by millionaires and literal billionaires in Oprah's case about how the white people are the problem.
Yeah. So I agree with what you said. I have made a mental decision not to demonize wealthy people because I believe it would be training my brain to reject money. And I want to have money. I want to have wealth. I'm happy for anybody that has money, but to pretend you don't, and that
Right.
you understand what it's like to be a black family in Chicago with crime, leaders saying we need less police, illegal immigrants taking over your YMCA, your school, your community center. Like these illegals are they're pushing these black families out. And Barack and Michelle Obama are like, hey, you know what? Rich people are terrible. But yeah, like you said, like her Martha's Vineyard house, $12 million, fully staffed, as if she's an English lordess, and
Landed
private
gentry
chef.
aristocracy.
Yeah, that same thing with Oprah. Like, how dare you, as a billionaire? Like, most people can't even imagine how big a billion is, and you have a multi-billionaire telling you, "I understand the wealth gap." Right? Like, yeah, because you're at the top of it. So again, I don't want to begrudge people with money, but I do begrudge people that pretend that they are poor in order to have rapport with people that are struggling with
Right.
middle class or lower income.
Right. It's the hypocrisy of it all that is so frustrating, and the weaponization of wealth differences, which I don't think are inherently problematic, to drum up this division amongst the American people. That is the problem. And I don't have a problem with people being successful, but when it comes to the Obamas specifically, we need to remember that this is a family that has spent their entire life in the public service, right? They are career politicians. Their wealth, I have to say, is a little bit different from a Mark Zuckerberg or a Jeff Bezos, these amazing entrepreneurs, even though I may disagree with them politically, but who have built something, contributed to the economy, provided legacy, and, tons and countless numbers of jobs to the economy. The Obamas, they have made hundreds of millions of dollars being politicians and doing what exactly? Is it all just the speeches? Is it all just the book deals? Like, I don't have any problem with wealthy people when it comes to politicians who miraculously get wealthy during or after their time in office, not through any discernible business dealings. That's when I'm like, of all the people, you are not the best ones to lecture us again about wealth inequality, about all of these different isms, racism, sexism, you name it, or even corruption, if I could say that.
Yeah. I wish I had a sponsor right now that, I could interject to help people, because, one of the things she said is that Black families will never have generational wealth. I don't believe that. But if that were the case, everybody can have generational wealth. Go buy permanent life insurance that pays out a large lump sum of money that is legally protected against being taxed by our corrupt government politicians. That's how you do generational wealth. Okay, boom. Let me move on. Like I said, wish I had a sponsor to insert, but there's a freebie for you. Okay, Jill Stein, who is running for the Green Party, said the Democrat Party must be renamed the Anti-Democratic Party since they've installed their last 3 election candidates by bypassing democracy and the will of their own voters. We saw this with Kamala Harris. We saw this with Joe Biden, and we saw this when they wiped out Bernie Sanders in favor of Hillary Clinton because the DNC was bankrupt because of Barack Obama. What are your thoughts on her comments that this needs to be the anti-democratic party?
Well, I'm no fan of Jill Stein. Her politics, I think, are in many ways even worse than those of Kamala Harris. But she makes a good point here for all of the fear mongering they do about how Trump will spell the end of democracy in America. Their own primary process does not have a very good history of being democratic. I think it's very fair to say that essentially what happened with Harris's nomination was it was kind of a silent coup, something that we really haven't seen historically happen before. I mean, a sitting president who's currently running again, he announces he is dropping out of the race via Twitter post and then is not seen for days after. It's very, very strange. I still think we should get to the bottom of what exactly happened there, the circumstances surrounding that post. And I think if we had an honest press and actually objective journalists, there would be more questions about it, questions that would be, being asked at the DNC toward these officials within the Democratic Party. But instead, it seems like most people are just willing to sweep this under the rug. And it's interesting because it seems like the progressives of the party, despite the fact that I don't overall agree with them, even more so than the moderates in the Democratic Party, they have been some of the more consistent voices calling attention to how undemocratic the primary process has been. A lot of Bernie Sanders fans, specifically, like you mentioned, do feel like he has been robbed several times of the party's nomination, of course, because he's not, in a lot of ways, actually a Democrat. He's run as an independent in the Senate. And I think party higher ups, they look at him and they're like, I don't think so, buddy. Like, you can't essentially vote against us in some cases, run against our Democratic primaries, candidates in Vermont, and then all of a sudden say, oh no, I'm your presidential candidate. Like, that doesn't work like that. So I think it's very fair to bring up these issues. And strangely enough, other people who have been kind of raising eyebrows about this include the Young Turks. They're not a fan of how this was done. Also, Black Lives Matter. Strangely enough, the outright Marxist organization Black Lives Matter, they penned an open letter to the public urging the Democratic Party to reevaluate how they're putting Kamala forward as the nominee, because they actually said that the lack of a democratic process in this regard calls into question the legitimacy of her candidacy, which again, I never thought I would agree with BLM about something, but here we are. So I think you're absolutely right. This is very undemocratic. I could only imagine the headlines that we would have if the Republican Party tried to do something similar.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of things to watch online, so I don't expect that you've seen this, but did you happen to see the Theo Von Bernie Sanders interview?
Bernie Sanders, no, actually.
Oh, okay. It was an interesting interview because in there, Donald Trump is brought up, and Bernie Sanders says, listen, I don't like the guy, but I get why Americans like him, because he's not a politician, and that's why DC hates him so much. I was like, oh man, I didn't expect Bernie Sanders to admit that out loud, but that is the truth. They like Donald Trump specifically because he's not a politician, but because of that, that's the reason the swamp in DC just hates his guts. They want him gone, dead, jailed, anything but in the White House.
No, you're so right. And Bernie Sanders, yeah, like, I'm not a fan of his politics, but he does have some surprisingly good insights when it comes to the toxicity of the DC establishment. I will say that.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, 350,000 Americans have died because of fentanyl under Kamala and Joe Biden. Now, just this morning, I'm reading 320,000 children have gone missing under Joe Biden's watch. The government admits they have no idea where these kids are. They're not looking for them. Why do you think Biden has such little regard for the lives of these young children and their whereabouts? Meanwhile, just this week, Donald Trump announced that if he becomes president, he will seek the death penalty for child rapists and child traffickers. What are your thoughts on these two different positions from these government leaders, and why is nobody looking for these children?
Unfortunately, what we see happening in American politics is that the only way to get real attention to your cause is if it potentially could affect a politician's candidacy. When it comes to children, unfortunately, there just aren't that many politicians concerned about them because I think they're asking themselves in a very, very calculated way, how does this help me get elected? And, a lot of these grieving parents who have missing children, well, they don't exactly have the same lobbying power as, the AFL-CIO or something like that. I don't mean to sound overly cynical, but I think that's just the reality of the world that we live in. And, the open border is a problem for many, many different issues. And people on the Republican side, we try to bring attention to this, how this is a crisis for America. And we are just called racist, insensitive, xenophobic, you name it. What people don't understand is that this is not just a question of people coming in, which of course is a huge issue, but it also involves smuggling goods, right? If people are coming in not through ports of entry, that means we don't know what they're bringing into the country. It could be things like arms and yes, like fentanyl. And then we look at the Americans who are largely being affected by this. Well, I think Joe Biden frankly doesn't care because this is the fentanyl epidemic specifically is something that has, largely swept white communities, poor and suburban communities who may not necessarily be Joe Biden's voting bloc, if we're being honest. And so, I think there's a lack of care there, a lack of urgency, because he's looking at this, asking himself if he even has the mental clarity to do so. Frankly, well, how does this actually affect me and my ability to retain power?
Yeah, or maybe he's just like, what do I care about fentanyl? My kids smoke crack. It's
right.
it's not a drug I have to worry about my children
Yeah.
touching. They've made the better decision, right? I hate to be cynical, but 350,000 people dead, 320,000 children missing, likely trafficked, body parts sold, abused. It's just gross. And nobody seems to care about it. But I think you're right. Until the public makes a big deal and threatens the reelection of somebody, just doesn't get time or attention.
Mhm.
Final question, Lauren. I appreciate you coming on. The Biden White House has been caught in a massive lie. 818,000 fabricated jobs, just invented, didn't really happen, all to boost his popularity, get the stock market to go up, increase his favorability rates. Did they think that we wouldn't find the truth out? Do you think that they didn't really care that if it was down the road, maybe people would be forgiving? This is a massive deal to lie about nearly 1 million jobs. What are your thoughts on this story?
I think they probably knew that there was some sort of fabrication. I don't believe that this was an honest mistake. Oopsie, million jobs here or there. How are we supposed to notice? I think this was very deliberate. And I think this was probably a calculated decision that, this will probably be corrected at some point, but it's okay because we're aware that correction headlines rarely ever make the same impact as the initial reporting of the story. So, for every 100 people who heard that, 1 million jobs more created under Biden, how many of those people will then hear the follow-up? Actually, that wasn't true. 20 of them, maybe 30 if we're being generous. But, in regard to the whole job situation under Biden, really, if we look at this administration, the entire narrative toward how the economy has been performing has been a farce. So what we essentially saw under President Trump was record performances under the economy for groups like Black workers, female workers. We saw real wages grow in a way that they hadn't in a very long time. Thank goodness. This was a great time to be looking for a job. and trying to work or to be opening a business. However, what we also saw during Trump's presidency was boom, COVID. And I don't think Trump handled the whole pandemic perfectly. I will say that. But at the same time, if we look at where some of the most strict lockdowns were occurring, they were being done by Democrat governors in Democrat states. So what we saw was an essential shutdown of the economy almost entirely in places like California, under people like Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. So a lot of jobs that had been created under President Trump were actually lost. Is it fair to attribute those lost jobs to President Trump? I don't think so. Even if you don't like Trump, you have to understand the role that governors played in this. They were active in the economy in a way that rarely, if ever, they have a reason to be. And then once Biden took office, what we saw happening was that slowly the economy began to recover. Biden, his administration, now is taking credit for those jobs coming back onto the market. Well, is it really fair to say that those jobs were created by Biden if they were simply the result of, being shut down by Democrat governors and then, businesses being allowed to open again? I don't think so. So, just initially, a lot of the job quote creation that they already report that is questionable. You throw on top of this made up, fabricated 800,000 jobs, and I think, people live in the real world. Americans, they are seeing what they're paying for groceries. They are seeing the amount of businesses that are struggling to keep up. I think it's very hard for the Biden team right now to try and convince anybody the economy is doing as well as they are saying. And these fabricated numbers are just one of the many examples of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Lauren, I want to thank you for coming on. It's fun to get some younger conservatives on the show and get your thoughts on what's going on. You are obviously well read and in the know on what's going on. If people want to follow you online, where can I push them?
Oh, well, first off, thank you so much. It's been a really fun chat, and I appreciate you having me. If people want to see more of what I'm up to, you can, of course, follow me on X. I'm at the Lauren Chen. If you type in Lauren Chen, I should pop up. And similarly on YouTube, my channel is Lauren Chen.
Okay. I'll put direct links so that people can find you easily. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.